Good morning, Tempe Church. As always, it is really good to be with you this morning, virtually, of course. Hopefully this will be our last time being virtual. But today is a very special day on the church calendar. And today we celebrate Pentecost, which commemorates what the events of Acts chapter 2, where we see God pour out the Holy Spirit on the followers of Jesus. And ironically, today and this past week, we have been studying John chapter 2. In which we see Jesus pouring out a gift in a different kind of way. So, let's set the scene. At the very end of John chapter 1, when Jesus starts calling his disciples, the text seems to indicate that Jesus gathers his disciples as he's on his way to the region of Galilee over a 2-day period. So Jesus had a very busy day. So, maybe even less than 24 hours after Jesus has finished gathering his disciples, Jesus and his family and the disciples make their way to Cana, which is a town in this region called Galilee, to a wedding that they've been invited to. And John the Beloved, who is the writer of this gospel, drops us into the middle of a wedding scene. It's toward the end of the day's festivities, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, alerts him that the newly wedded couple has run out of wine. And how embarrassing is this? If you've ever hosted a party, you probably know that one of the worst fears a host has is that they're going to run out of food. And this isn't just a party, this is a wedding. And running out of wine at a wedding is an even bigger embarrassment. So Mary turns to her son and tells him about this because she clearly believes that Jesus can do something about it. And so starting in verse 6, the text says, "Now 6 stone water jars had been set there for Jewish purification. Each contained 20 or 30 gallons. Fill the jars with water," Jesus told the servants. So they filled them to the brim. He said, "Now draw some out and take it to the head waiter." And they did. When the head waiter tasted the water after it had become wine, he did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. He called the groom and told them, "Everyone sets out the fine wine first. Then, after people are drunk, the inferior. But you have kept the fine wine until now." And there is so much that we could unpack in this text. But the very first thing that I want to impress upon you is that this is the very first miracle of Jesus. And it's at a wedding. And of course, there are plenty of sick people around. There's plenty of hungry people around. And there are plenty of people who need a miracle. But Jesus chose to do his first miracle at a wedding, a celebration between the union of 2 people. And John the Beloved is a master storyteller, and he doesn't miss anything. And John includes details in the text that are important, and they speak very loudly. And with that in mind, I believe that John is highlighting not just the union between the Father and the Son, but I think that he's also trying to tell us that God desires to be united with us as his bride. And now it makes sense why this would be Jesus' first miracle. Jesus is making a huge statement. He's saying, "This is the goal, for you to be my beloved bride." And with this vision of how a relationship with God should be in mind, Jesus demonstrates what kind of gift giver he is by the gift that he gives this couple. As the text indicates, Jesus turned 6 really big jars of water, each of them had about 30 gallons, into wine. Now, don't laugh, but I wanted to know how many 4-ounce glasses were in this big conglomeration of wine. And the grand total is 5,760 glasses of wine. And I hope you realize that's insane. Even if there were 500 guests at this wedding, this would be enough for 11.5 more glasses per person. And this is after they are already drunk. So Jesus has given this couple an abundant gift and quantity to celebrate their union. But the gift doesn't stop here. The head waiter says that this wine is very fine. What a lavish gift giver Jesus is. Jesus celebrates hard. Jesus doesn't just provide a little bit of some mediocre wine for the rest of the party. When Jesus asks these servants to fill the jars, the text says that they fill them to the brim. love this detail because it says so much about the character of God. God is so abundant on our behalf. He doesn't just give us enough, but he gives us all the love that we could ever need. And the other thing that I want to impress upon you is that when Jesus provides, it is always the best. We live in a world where everything is scarce. Our time is very scarce, and we are encouraged to work to the bone just so that we can have enough money to purchase the things that we think we need. But if it doesn't come from Jesus, it is never going to be enough. If we aren't living in the abundance of God, and by that, I mean if we aren't living in trust that God knows our needs and will provide in just the right ways, then we will never be living the life of celebration that Jesus wants for us. So remember, Jesus isn't going to just give you mediocre wine. He is going to give you fine wine and more than you could, or really should, ever drink. And last week, Michael challenged us to reflect the light of God. And so this week, I challenge you to reflect the abundance of God. Jesus used servants to accomplish this miracle. He used servants to deliver his gift of abundance. He chose the most unseen people to reveal his glory. So don't just trust God's provision for yourself. Let God use you to pour out his abundance on others. Because in this unprecedented time, maybe you have a lot more time on your hands than you normally would. So pour out this abundance of time by calling someone who's lonely and have a conversation with them. Maybe pour out your abundance of time by going to the grocery store and purchasing groceries for your neighbors who are at risk. If you've been blessed to not be financially burdened during this time, then pour out that abundance and be creative. I've seen so many people making skincare packages for frontline workers because the amount of masks and the amount of work that they're doing every day, it really damages their skin. And maybe even write a check quietly. Write a check quietly for those who are really concerned that they're going to get behind on their bills. Because the thing is that we hear stories all of the time about people being in need, and suddenly God sends them a check in the mail of just the amount they need. And though I do think that God is perfectly capable of writing checks and putting them in your mailboxes, it's more likely that God spoke to someone and said, "Hey, will you pour out my abundance?" And then they listened. Jesus tells us in the 15th chapter of this gospel that because we are his friends, we know what God is up to. Just like these servants knew that Jesus had turned the water into wine, even though no one else knew. As friends of God, we can know what the Father is doing. And so I urge you, as soon as you are done with this worship email, find a quiet place and ask God, "Father, what are you up to in this crazy time? And how can I be a part of it? How can I show your abundance?" And see what he says. And if you aren't sure what he's saying, maybe grab a trusted spiritual friend and pray together about it. And so this is the first of Jesus' miracles, a miracle of celebration and abundance. And Jesus did it through servants who were willing to say yes to him. So go and do likewise. Thank you, church. Have a great rest of your day and live abundantly.